Hello. I'm being shuttled around. I think you're my last group.
Cualquier preguntita, por favor, tienen que utilizar el micrófono que no se escuche en la sala para que se pueda escuchar vía Ustream, ¿ok? Primera pregunta.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening chat. We were debating here and had quite a few chats about different points of view, with different points of view concerning your conference. Of particular interest was the issue of structure and innovation.
Yes.
And if we recalled, all of us recalled correctly, that you mentioned it was a tension relationship, and you classified it as that. But you also mentioned that they needed to function together.
Yeah.
So we were looking at more traditional information processing approaches and thinking that perhaps they were more structurally based, and then we were looking at more connectivist models and thinking that they're more innovatively based, and then we were wondering how to use technology within the information processing approach and the connectionist or connectivist model.
All right. Well, I do think they are in tension, innovation and structure. But see, it's a matter of, structure allows us to scale. I mean, if we would have never, I know there's a lot of criticism on the school system, the K-12 system these days, but if you think of it, we would have never got an educated population the way that most developed countries do if we hadn't scaled the classroom. Right, and that's the value, I guess, in terms of scalability. A system that scales is one that can be duplicated, which means it can then be funded and it can then be measured. And as much as we hate measurement, it's a reality of the system. It's what taxpayers expect. So from a connectivist perspective, I haven't spent much time on scaling, and because I still view it as a research activity. And as I'm sure you're aware, if somebody is sitting in a lab conducting research with chemicals, they're not worried about patenting it and rolling it out to other systems to use. First, they're trying to figure out what is it, how does it act, what does it do, those kinds of activities. That's your innovation stage. Once you've decided you have something that's interesting or that might work, then you can start talking about how do you scale it, how do you spread it out more broadly. And I'm not at that stage yet in terms of, I'm talking about what I do with learning in a class setting, and there's options I think that others might be able to take in their teaching and learning practices. But I'm not here to say all of you should now teach exactly this way. In terms of experimenting in your own activity in classrooms, because I think any teacher should be an active experimentator. In your own activity, it would be a matter of you start small. It's this notion of low threshold application that was developed by the LTA group years ago. And they say, you start with something small, right? If you're not comfortable using social network technologies in your classroom, maybe you're comfortable just creating a blog yourself, and once a week you post update on what happened in your class, and maybe a few students comment. Maybe next semester you try using a Twitter hashtag, or maybe you get students to share resources on Delicious. So it's all about starting where, because there's no right model. There's no way I could go up to you and say, by next fall you should do all of these things, and then to say you should do the same thing and you should do this. It's more about saying, if I know your experience, your interest in your subject, we can talk about what would work well for you or whoever. So those are the kinds of challenges you face, is that the answer doesn't exist in advance of the context.
Hi, thanks for your lecture. It was awesome. My question is, how do you make traditional universities go and think your way? How do you make traditional universities believe in connectivism and begin to implement connectivism in their programs or in their way of thinking?
Well, I think first of all I would say they already do. They do it with their research. A researcher at a university, I gave the example of the SARS session, during the presentation, which is, one illustration of a university or a research system comprised of researchers that shared, collaborated, connected their resources, and innovated in the process by discovering, in really a record time, identifying the particular virus. So researchers are very used to this already. In a university setting, they're used to it because they write papers that get published in journals where they connect with ideas from other people and they interact around that, and they do their activity in a lab where they're working with grad students and they innovate. So they're already doing it. The problem is they're not doing it with their teaching practices. And I think that's sort of where my concern rests, more so on the teaching end, because it's not that this is anything spectacularly new for faculty members to think about. It isn't. They've probably done it for a good portion of their lives already. But making that transition teaching-wise requires that the university values teaching more so than it does in a lot of cases. And secondly, it also requires that educators are able to model for students ways of being, ways of thinking. And I guess, again, we look at this a little bit after lunch, but I can't overstate the value of faculty members being able to communicate, not with words, but with their actions, how they approach a subject, how they deal with a complex subject matter. And it's a challenge, I think, for university faculty members because a lot of the students that are coming to university now have had years of experience with social media. And there's a lot of, as mentioned in an earlier group, that the K-12 system sometimes is actually more innovative than higher education. They're using blogs and wikis and stuff like that in the classroom already. So when those students come to universities, they're going to be faced with a sudden return to history, right, where now they're going to be in a classroom lecturing. Now the teachers will say, well, we're going to cut off your internet connection, or some universities have done as they said, we block Facebook in our class, which is fine, block Facebook. I'll come to school with my iPad, with my Wi-Fi, or with my connection with whichever service provider I'm with, AT&T. I'll come in and you can't, unless you block AT&T in the school, you can't block me. So what's happening, and this is what I mentioned earlier, like openness produces more of itself. And so these students who are used to some openness and some interaction are going to come to the university system. And the university is going to try and shut down the systems they use to interact, but they can't. Just like the example I gave with the University of Alberta or Calgary illustration about, I no longer fear hell. I've taken a class with so-and-so. Well, you can't block that anymore. I mean, if somebody's going to have an idea, it's going to be out there. And the worst thing to do is to sue it. Nobody would have ever heard of this if they would have just left it. But they sued, and now everybody hears about it, and everybody's aware of it. And that's the danger. If you try and squish openness flat, it squirts up in a lot of different forms.
One more question before we end.
Do you really think that universities are that traditional? What's traditional? What's traditional university?
Traditional university would be if I know there's no classes in session right now, but traditional university would be if we walked out of this room and went to a lecture hall, and we watched what students were doing, and we watched what the teacher was doing. And we watched who had the power to decide what should be read in this class and which videos should be watched. And we would then ask students and say, how many of you have contributed learning resources to other students in this class? And chances are, traditional would be the instructor is the top of the pyramid and everything spills down from there. The information structure I would like still values the expertise of the instructor, but because students have such different knowledge bases that they can fill each other's gaps for themselves to a large degree, you instead have a network structure where the instructor node is still a big node, but it's not the only node that's providing and disseminating information. So yes, teaching is still, I think, as traditional by that model of where does the information flow from and who controls what gets shared. The research end, though, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize, is that in that regard it's not. Universities are very innovative systems. Universities push back boundaries of knowledge all the time. New algorithms, new life forms are discovered, new research studies, new cures. So universities are always pushing boundaries of knowledge in research. I don't think they're doing a great job pushing boundaries of research and teaching. Yeah, so that's the weakness that I see. But as a whole, the university is a very innovative knowledge system. Unfortunately, for the students that pay to come there, it isn't.
Because we were commenting how old teachers I'm not saying that he's old, but I mean he has been a teacher for, he has been experienced teachers. We have changed our way of teaching, and doing things. Still in the classroom, we still have the power of the themes or the content of the, but not that much in the methods.
Yeah.
At least I've changed so much in my methodology. But I teach mathematics, and that's it. You know.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm gonna teach algebra, that's what I have to teach.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm teaching calculus, I have to teach calculus. You know, the content is there.
And it's worth emphasizing that every context is different, which means there's no, like I said earlier, there's no answer that exists ahead of the context. I would give very different advice to, let's say, someone in psychology or chemistry or whatever else than someone in math or physics, because some areas have a more structured knowledge domain. You know, that's why they call them the hard sciences. So that's definitely the case.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
That's it, we're done? All right,
Yes, we're
thanks.
done. Thank you.